Around 6 million years ago, our planet was nothing like it is today. Africa, regarded as the cradle of humankind, was then a vast landscape of dense green forests interspersed with dry savannas. Gigantic animals roamed the grasslands: ancient elephants, primitive giraffes, and fearsome saber-toothed cats. Amid this world, small creatures, part ape and part human, began a journey no one could have foreseen: the evolutionary path that would lead to Homo sapiens, modern humans. Our earliest ancestors were not strong. They lacked sharp claws to defend themselves and had no speed to outrun predators. What they possessed were only minor changes in body structure: the ability to walk on two legs, slightly more dexterous hands, and a brain that was slowly growing larger. These seemingly small shifts marked a profound turning point, enabling early humans to survive the harsh trials of nature. Over millions of years, our ancestors had to adapt constantly, from foraging in dense forests to hunting on open plains, from living in scattered groups to forming tight-knit communities, from silent gestures to alarm calls signaling danger. Each step, each change laid the foundation for the intelligence and survival instincts of modern humans. The story of 6 million years ago is not only biological history, but also an epic of perseverance. Without those first frail yet unyielding beings, there would be no civilization, no great inventions, and none of us gathered here to retell this journey. Around 6 million years ago, Earth entered a period of intense climate and environmental upheaval. It was a critical transitional moment in evolutionary history, for natural changes not only reshaped continents and ecosystems, but also imposed challenges that forced human ancestors to adapt or perish. To understand why humans came into existence, we must turn back time to the wild, unforgiving world of the late Miocene epoch. At this time, the Miocene was drawing to a close. Earth had already undergone tens of millions of years of transformation. Once warm and covered by vast rainforests, it now experienced a global cooling trend. Ice sheets expanded at the poles, especially Antarctica, altering sea levels and weather systems. The continents of Eurasia, Africa, and India gradually took their modern shapes after tectonic collisions. The Himalayas towered high, strongly influencing monsoons and regional climates. Across vast areas, tropical forests shrank, giving way to grasslands, arid savannas, and sparse woodlands. This was a turning point. As habitats changed, so too did the food and shelter available to primates. Without endless forest canopies to climb, our ancestors had to adapt to open grasslands where predators had the advantage. The world 6 million years ago was not dominated by primates alone. It was an age of giant, ferocious animals. On African grasslands, massive elephants with long tusks roamed in search of leaves, the ancient ancestors of today's elephants. Primitive horses and antelopes lived in large herds, swift and well adapted to the savanna, serving as prey for predators. Saber-toothed cats lurked in the shadows, capable of felling prey many times their size with a single strike. Early tigers, leopards, hyenas, and wolves were all apex hunters. Amid this, our small, defenseless ancestors, without claws, without speed, were easy prey. Survival seemed nearly impossible without creativity and special adaptability. Not only animals, but also plants underwent a revolution. Wet rainforests receded. Grasses thrived, forming vast prairies. Thorny shrubs grew sparsely, offering temporary shelter for primates. Food sources changed: fewer fruits, more tough seeds, roots, and young grasses. The scarcity of fruit forced early humans to diversify their diets.
They began eating tubers, seeds, and even scavenging animal remains left by predators. This dietary shift drove the development of stronger molars and larger brains, enabling them to process varied foods. Globally, climate 6 million years ago became drier, colder, and more erratic. Seasons of rain and drought grew sharper, challenging both flora and fauna. For our ancestors, this meant scarce water, requiring longer treks to find rivers and ponds. Harsh heat, forcing them to seek shade or caves. Seasonal hunger, pushing them to innovate when fruit and leaves vanished. These were evolutionary pressures, forcing primates to develop new traits. Chief among them, bipedalism, which improved visibility, allowed long-distance travel, and freed the hands. In a predator-filled world, early humans constantly faced threats, stalked from every side by hunters, competing fiercely with other species for food, risking starvation, disease, and sudden environmental shifts. Yet adversity also created opportunity. Open plains allowed better visibility of approaching danger. Freed hands enabled carrying food, picking up stones, and wielding sticks. Group living provided safety in numbers.
The world 6 million years ago was a forge of survival. The weak perished, and only those who adapted and cooperated lived to pass on their genes. Such harsh conditions set the stage for Sahelanthropus chidensis, one of the earliest known species close to humans. Without shrinking forests and expanding savannas, humans might have remained mere tree-dwelling primates, and Homo sapiens may never have existed. Thus, the brutal climate, dangerous predators, and shifting environment of 6 million years ago became the launch pad for one of the most spectacular evolutionary journeys in Earth's history. Between 7 and 6 million years ago, in the hot heart of Central Africa, small but historic changes took place. A peculiar primate species emerged, Sahelanthropus chidensis, often considered one of the earliest candidates on the human lineage. Its story is not only told through a handful of fossil bones, but also opens a window into humanity's first steps. In 2001, in the Jurab Desert of northern Chad, scientists unearthed a strange fossil skull dating back 6 to 7 million years, older than any previously known human ancestor fossil. It was named Tumai, meaning hope of life in the local language. This skull of Sahelanthropus chidensis proved that human ancestors appeared much earlier than thought, right when forests were giving way to savannas. Key features included a small brain volume, 350 to 370 centimeters cubed, similar to modern chimpanzees but slightly larger than typical primates. A relatively flat face, unlike chimps' protruding faces, more human-like. Smaller canines suggesting social and dietary changes, and a foramen magnum where the skull meets the spine, positioned to indicate partial bipedalism. This was crucial. Bipedalism was the defining trait separating humans from other primates. Though still climbing trees, Sahelanthropus chidensis likely walked upright on the ground at times. Benefits included spotting predators from afar, freeing hands to carry food, stones, or sticks, reducing direct exposure to sunlight compared to quadrupedal walking. Its early bipedalism was clumsy and slow, making them easy prey, but it was a biological revolution, laying the groundwork for all future human evolution. Their teeth and jaws revealed a diverse diet. Soft fruits and leaves from forests. Energy-rich nuts, tubers, and roots during dry seasons.
Possibly insects or scavenged animal remains. This dietary flexibility was a survival advantage in unpredictable environments. Although evidence is limited, scientists infer that Sahelanthropus lived in small groups with basic roles like males defending and females raising young. Communication via calls, hoots, and gestures. Such social bonds later gave humans their evolutionary edge. There is still debate as to Sahelanthropus whether it is a direct ancestor or a parallel branch that went extinct. Either way, its existence pushes back the origin of the human lineage to 7 million years ago. Its significance? The first evidence of upright walking, the first signs of human-like facial and dental traits, the first primates daring to step from forest shade into open plains. From then on, species such as Aurorin tugenensis, Ardipithecus ramidus, Australopithecus afarensis, and later Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and Homo sapiens would follow. The lesson from Sahelanthropus: survival hinged on adaptability, creativity, and social bonds, the very traits that paved the way to modern civilization.
Reading this content is so eloquent. If you find it interesting and meaningful, please live share the video and subscribe to the channel to follow the next videos. Sincerely thank you. Goodbye and see you again.
Ancient humans 4 million years ago, the struggle for survival through drought and famine. Introduction: a harsh planet and the first steps of humanity. Around 4 million years ago, Earth was not the planet we know today. The world was marked by climatic instability, with cycles of severe drought alternating with short periods of rainfall. The African lowlands, particularly East Africa, the cradle of humanity, constantly shifted between dense forests, open savannas, and barren deserts. It was here that the earliest steps of our ancestors echoed, beginning a long evolutionary journey that would ultimately lead to us. Our survival as modern humans is owed to extraordinary adaptability. But when we look back into the deep past, a fundamental question emerges. How did ancient humans, 4 million years ago, survive devastating droughts and waves of famine when food sources nearly disappeared? To answer this, we must examine several dimensions: the global climate, the African environment, the physiology and behavior of Australopithecus, the first hominins, who laid the foundations of humanity, as well as their survival strategies rooted in instinct, society, and biology. This is not just the story of a single species, but a testimony to the power of evolution. From scarcity and hardship came intelligence, cooperation, and creativity, the traits that define us today. Climate and environment. Cycles of drought and harshness. During droughts, food sources dropped to the bare minimum. Plants, the primary source of energy, became scarce, and herds of grazing animals migrated away. Ancient humans faced 3 major challenges. 1. Plants became scarce and difficult to digest. Soft fruits, tender leaves, and nutritious tubers disappeared. What remained were tough roots, bark, and dry seeds, which required powerful jaws and teeth to chew. 2. Large animals were impossible to hunt, small animals hard to catch. With short stature, about 1.2 to 1.4 meters, and crude tools, Australopithecus could not bring down big game. They resorted to catching insects, reptiles, birds, or scavenging carcasses left behind by predators. 3. Water was equally scarce. Beyond food, water supplies dried up. Locating muddy puddles or stored rainwater inside tree hollows became a critical survival skill. Our ancestors, Australopithecus afarensis, best known from the fossil skeleton Lucy, lived between 4 and 3 million years ago. They were fully bipedal, with brains of about 400 to 500 centimeters cubed, only a third the size of modern humans, and lived in small groups. Their strength did not lie in speed or muscle, but in adaptability. They could climb trees to harvest fruits or escape predators. They had strong jaws and thick enamel, enabling them to grind tough and fibrous plants when better food was unavailable. They began using natural tools, such as rocks and sticks, to crack nuts or dig for roots. These traits laid the foundation for survival strategies in times of drought and famine. Survival strategies in times of hunger. When food supplies collapsed, our ancestors deployed a range of strategies to prolong survival. 5.1. Foraging wild plants. They expanded their diet to include fallback foods, roots, bark, dry seeds, wild grasses, and even tree sap. Dental microwear analyses of fossils show that Australopithecus often consumed tough, abrasive foods, evidence that they survived on whatever was left. 5.2. Small-scale hunting and scavenging. Unable to kill large prey, they caught lizards, young birds, insects, or raided nests for eggs. A crucial strategy was scavenging carcasses. After predators finished feeding, early humans used sharp stones or sticks to scrape meat and crack bones for marrow, a nutrient-rich resource unavailable to most other animals. 5.3. Migration and seasonal movement. Early humans did not remain in one spot. They moved with the seasons, following rivers, animal trails, or distant vegetation. Each migration was a life-or-death gamble. Not every group found sustenance. Some scholars argue that these movements created evolutionary pressure, sharpening spatial memory, navigation skills, and group cooperation. Crude tools and their role in survival. Archaeological finds suggest that stone tools were in use at least 3.3 million years ago, slightly later than Australopithecus, but likely rooted in earlier behaviors. Even crude flaked stones provided enormous advantages: cracking bones to extract marrow, digging underground tubers, defending against predators. Tools, however primitive, were the evolutionary lever that allowed our ancestors to exploit food resources otherwise inaccessible. Early social organization, cooperation as survival. A lone hominin could scarcely endure drought and famine. Group living became a survival weapon. Within bands, males could act as lookouts, females could gather, and food was shared. Sharing was not merely altruism, it was evolutionary logic. When one starving individual was saved by group resources, the group's reproductive potential was preserved. This mechanism of social evolution laid the groundwork for cooperation, an enduring hallmark of humanity. Comparison with other predators, why humans endured. Why did early humans not go extinct like many primate species? Several key reasons. Flexible diet, not restricted to plants or meat alone. Capacity for migration, not bound to a single territory. Social cooperation, mutual defense and sharing. Primitive tools, allowed exploitation of resources predators ignored. While many species collapsed when their narrow diets failed, our ancestors were intelligent omnivores, a decisive survival advantage. Evolutionary consequences: brain, intelligence, and social behavior. Drought and famine were not only threats, they were drivers of evolution. The need to solve problems of food and water fueled gradual brain expansion.
Larger brains, necessary for memory, spatial awareness, and tool use. Social intelligence. Cooperation required communication and cohesion, giving rise to proto-language. Cultural behavior. Food sharing, group migration, and leadership roles all laid the foundation of later human societies. Conclusion: drought, hunger, and humanity's path of evolution. 4 million years ago, our ancestors lived in a brutal world. Droughts withered plants, animals migrated, and death lurked constantly. Yet, instead of disappearing like countless other species, they adapted, eating broadly, using tools, migrating, and cooperating. These struggles against hunger and drought forged humanity. They sharpened intelligence, deepened social bonds, and ignited cultural beginnings. In truth, without those harsh crises, humankind might never have evolved into what we are today. If you find it interesting and meaningful, please live share the video and subscribe to the channel to follow the next videos. Sincerely thank you, goodbye, and see you again.
Let's imagine for a moment that you could travel back 50,000 years. Around you, there are no cities, no internet, not even writing. Humans lived in small groups, wandering from place to place, hunting and gathering food. They had to fight wild animals, endure harsh weather, and deal with complicated relationships within their own tribes. Here's a sensitive but fascinating question. In prehistoric times, when humans had no concept of family or law, did sexual relations between close relatives occur? And if so, how did it affect the evolution of humankind? In this long video, we'll travel across tens of thousands of years of history, from the dawn of humanity to the rise of civilizations and their taboos. By the end, you'll understand why incest is a universal taboo today, but also how it was once an unavoidable part of our distant past. So let's begin with Chapter 1, Prehistory and the Rise of Humankind. To understand the story of sex, marriage, and incest, we need to go back to the beginning. Where did humans come from? Around 6 to 7 million years ago, our distant ancestors split from the lineage that led to chimpanzees. Over millions of years, many human species emerged and disappeared, leaving only fossil traces. Among the most notable are Homo habilis, handyman, about 2.4 million years ago, who first used stone tools. Homo erectus, erect man, living about 1.8 million years ago, who left Africa and spread across Eurasia. And finally, Homo sapiens, our modern species, appearing around 200 to 300,000 years ago in Africa. At the beginning, Homo sapiens were not numerous. Genetic studies suggest that all modern humans may descend from just a few thousand individuals. This means our ancestors lived in small groups, and when a community is so tiny, choosing partners often meant choosing from close relatives. Picture a band of 20 to 40 people, moving constantly to find food. Men hunted, women gathered, and children grew up together. There were no marriage contracts, no family registries, and no clear concept of extended relatives. Sexual relations in this context were more fluid than today, directly tied to survival and reproduction. With limited options, sexual relations between kin were not only possible, they were almost inevitable. But evolution never stands still. Children born from incest were often weaker, more prone to disease, and less likely to survive. By contrast, groups that exchanged partners with outsiders produced healthier offspring.
Over time, a natural instinct to avoid incest began to emerge. It wasn't yet a law, but a product of natural selection. Groups with less inbreeding thrived, while others faded away. In hunter-gatherer life, survival was everything. Eating, sleeping, reproducing, all were part of instinct, but subtle patterns of behavior regarding mate choice were already forming. Men often hunted, women gathered and cared for children. This division influenced mate selection. Skilled hunters were more attractive to women, while fertile women were valued as bearers of the next generation. Anthropologists suggest that early humans did not practice strict monogamy. Instead, sexual relations within tribes were varied and flexible. This increased the likelihood of incest.
A man might sleep with several women, some of whom could be close relatives. But since the concept of kinship was vague, this wasn't considered wrong at the time. When small groups met, they sometimes exchanged partners. This practice helped avoid conflict and boosted genetic diversity. Children born of mixed tribes were healthier, reinforcing the practice over generations. This was the first step toward incest avoidance, even if the people themselves didn't consciously realize it. So why was incest widespread in early human history? At times, humanity dwindled to just a few thousand individuals. With such a small pool, incest was inevitable. Modern society distinguishes parents, siblings, cousins, uncles, and aunts. Prehistoric humans did not. Children grew up together, identified simply as tribe members, and so mating within close kin was common. In a harsh environment, producing offspring was the top priority. Fertility mattered more than bloodlines. The downside, high rates of genetic disease, birth defects, and infant mortality. Groups that relied heavily on incest often weakened or died out. Groups that mixed bloodlines grew stronger and survived. This evolutionary pressure laid the foundation for the universal incest taboo we know today. Modern genetics confirms what natural selection taught our ancestors. Incest is harmful. Children of close relatives face higher risks of genetic diseases. Birth defects and infant mortality increase. Reading this content is so eloquent. Fertility in subsequent generations often declines. In prehistoric times, without medicine, these consequences were devastating. Weak children rarely survived harsh winters or long hunts. Natural selection gradually weeded out highly inbred groups. In contrast, groups that exchanged partners across tribes produced more robust descendants, ensuring survival. In effect, nature punished incest by lowering survival chances while rewarding diversity. This explains why nearly all human cultures developed incest taboos. They weren't arbitrary, they were products of evolution. As humans shifted to early agriculture, everything changed. Permanent settlements led to larger populations and clearer family structures. In settled communities, people began to distinguish between fathers, mothers, and siblings. Kinship became clearer, and informal rules against incest emerged. These rules weren't just about biology. If siblings fought over the same mate, the tribe risked division. By discouraging incest, leaders reduced internal conflict. Remarkably, societies across the world, in Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Americas, developed incest taboos independently. This universality shows it was a natural step in human evolution. Beyond biology and social needs, religion and belief systems reinforced incest prohibitions. Tribes often believed in ancestral spirits. Sexual relations within the same bloodline could be seen as offensive to the spirits. Thus, avoiding incest became sacred. With the rise of great civilizations, laws formally outlawed incest. In ancient China, Confucian ideals emphasized family roles, condemning incest as immoral. In the West, the Bible explicitly banned incestuous unions. In India, the Manusmriti prohibited marriage within the same clan. Religion strengthened these laws by associating incest with divine punishment. Fear of gods made taboos nearly unbreakable. In agricultural civilizations, kinship structures grew more complex. Clans became the basic social unit. Marriage was no longer just about individuals, but also about alliances between families.
Reading this content is so eloquent. In China,
clan-based prohibitions were codified. In Rome, incest was explicitly outlawed. Marriage evolved into a tool for political and economic strategy. Families sought alliances, further reducing incest. Yet, exceptions existed. In ancient Egypt, royal families sometimes practiced sibling marriage to preserve divine blood, but even there, common people adhered to outbreeding. Thus, incest shifted from being common to being an elite rarity rather than the norm. Studies of surviving tribal groups show nearly all had rules against incest, though the rules varied. Some banned marriage within a clan, others within a village. This proves the universality of the taboo. Early humans did go through periods of unavoidable inbreeding. Over time, intergroup mating vastly improved genetic diversity. Today, science clearly demonstrates incest's dangers. Most countries legally prohibit incestuous relationships, reflecting both biological necessity and cultural heritage. We've traveled across history. In prehistory, incest was a necessity due to tiny populations. In hunter-gatherer societies, partner exchange began reducing inbreeding. In agricultural and civilized societies, laws, taboos, and religions firmly banned incest. And today, genetics confirms these bans as vital for survival. What we call morality today is deeply rooted in tens of thousands of years of natural selection and cultural evolution. Without this process, humanity might not have survived or thrived as it has. Thank you for watching this long video. If you found this topic fascinating, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and to hear more stories about the evolution and history of humankind.
From the earliest days of humanity, the question of how our prehistoric ancestors moved from a life of wandering herds and communal survival toward the structured practice of marriage has fascinated scholars. The transformation from a herd-based existence, where mating was relatively unstructured, to a more organized and exclusive union between a man and a woman marks one of the most decisive transitions in the history of our species. To understand when and how prehistoric people learned to live as husbands and wives, rather than as members of a promiscuous group, we must trace a journey spanning millions of years of evolution, survival, and cultural development. Around 4 million years ago, the earliest ancestors of modern humans, species like Australopithecus afarensis, roamed the plains of Africa. They were not yet fully human, but walked upright, foraged for food, and relied heavily on group protection. At this time, the idea of a stable family unit did not exist. Mating was opportunistic, driven by instincts similar to those of our closest relatives, chimpanzees and bonobos. In such groups, dominant males often monopolized access to fertile females, while lower-ranking males had fewer opportunities. Females, in turn, sought protection and access to food, often aligning themselves with stronger males. However, human evolution did not follow the same path as chimpanzees. One of the greatest challenges early humans faced was the extreme vulnerability of their offspring. Unlike many other primates, human infants are born incredibly helpless. Their brains are large but underdeveloped, requiring years of care before they can survive independently. This biological reality meant that a single mother, no matter how resourceful, could rarely raise a child alone in the harsh prehistoric environment. Without assistance, especially from a consistent male partner, infants would have had little chance of survival. Here lies the seed of marital bonds. The survival of the young became a shared responsibility, gradually encouraging longer-term pairings between men and women. The father's role was not merely biological reproduction, but also provision, hunting, gathering, and protection. The mother, meanwhile, provided direct care and nurturing. The longer humans evolved, the more important this dual partnership became, distinguishing us from other primates whose young grow faster and require less parental investment. Archaeological evidence suggests that by the time of Homo erectus, nearly 2 million years ago, hints of pair bonding were already emerging. These early humans mastered the use of fire, hunted in coordinated groups, and likely shared food within family units. Fossilized remains often show adults and children buried together, suggesting recognition of kinship ties. While we cannot say they practiced marriage as we understand it today, there was clearly a shift away from purely herd-like mating toward longer-lasting partnerships. The development of tools and the sharing of food further reinforced this bond. Hunting large animals required cooperation, and meat was too valuable to distribute randomly. Men who consistently provided food gained social status and attracted female partners who sought stable support. Over time, these relationships grew into semi-exclusive arrangements, laying the groundwork for family structures. Yet, the transition was gradual and complex. For long periods, humans likely lived in extended groups where mating was somewhat flexible, but with increasing emphasis on pair bonds. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer tribes today, such as the Hadza of Tanzania or the San of the Kalahari, observe that while community support remains vital, individual families form the nucleus of society. These modern examples provide a window into how prehistoric humans may have lived, neither purely communal nor fully monogamous, but a blend shaped by survival needs. The psychological dimension also evolved. Over time, natural selection favored individuals capable of forming emotional attachments. Love, jealousy, and loyalty are not arbitrary cultural inventions, they are evolutionary adaptations. A man who felt affection for his partner and children was more likely to protect them. A woman who valued a stable mate had a greater chance of raising healthy offspring. These emotional traits, once beneficial, became embedded in the human brain. They are why, even today, humans instinctively seek exclusive partnerships and feel deep pain at betrayal.
We must hunt it. Yes.
Another critical factor was the invention of fire. Gathering around a hearth not only provided warmth and safety, but also created social spaces where families could bond. The hearth became a symbol of unity, a center around which children were raised and stories were told. It transformed the chaotic life of the herd into something more intimate and structured. Over thousands of years, this laid the emotional and cultural foundation for marriage. It is essential to recognize that this shift was not uniform across all groups of humans. Different environments produce different social strategies. In resource-rich regions, communal living may have persisted longer, while in harsher climates, the necessity of stable pair bonds became more pronounced. Evolution is not a straight line, but a branching tree, and marriage as an institution emerged gradually through many experiments in survival. By the time of Homo sapiens, around 300,000 years ago, the seeds of modern marriage were firmly planted. Our ancestors lived in small bands where each family had its own place within the group. Hunting and gathering were often divided by gender, with men focusing on larger game and women on plants and small animals. Cooperation between husband and wife was not only practical, but essential. Raising children required years of teaching, and the home became the primary site of cultural transmission. Language, myths, and skills were passed down within families, ensuring continuity across generations. Thus, the story of marriage begins not with laws or ceremonies, but with survival. It was survival that demanded men and women form lasting bonds. It was survival that shaped our emotions toward love and loyalty. And it was survival that slowly turned humanity away from the promiscuous herd into stable family units. Rituals that revealed an increasingly complex social structure. At the heart of these changes lay the family unit, gradually replacing the herd as the fundamental building block of society. One of the clearest signs of this shift is the appearance of symbolic burials. Archaeologists have discovered graves where men, women, and children were buried together, often with tools, ornaments, and food. Such practices show not only a belief in life after death, but also recognition of kinship and family. If prehistoric humans merely lived as herds, we would expect to find burials without clear family groupings. Instead, we see evidence of families being honored and remembered as cohesive units. The increasing importance of family ties was also reflected in art. Cave paintings, carvings, and figurines frequently depict animals, hunting scenes, and fertility symbols. Among these, the so-called Venus figurines, small carvings of women with exaggerated features, are believed to symbolize fertility and motherhood. These figurines remind us that the survival of the group depended heavily on women's ability to bear and nurture children. At the same time, the presence of men in hunting scenes highlights the dual responsibility of providing food and protection. Together, these artistic expressions reveal the deepening cultural recognition of complementary roles within the family. Food sharing further reinforced pair bonds. Hunting large game was risky and uncertain, but when successful, the meat was shared not only with the entire group, but also preferentially within family units. Women contributed by gathering plants, roots, and berries, creating a balance of resources. The husband-wife partnership thus became the most efficient system for survival. Each relied on the other, the man on the woman for raising children and maintaining daily life, the woman on the man for protection and supplemental food. Language played an equally critical role. As humans developed more complex speech, communication within families became central to survival. Parents could teach their children specific skills, pass on cultural knowledge, and instill values. This ability to transmit information across generations gave humans an extraordinary advantage over other species. The family unit, anchored by the marital bond, became the vessel through which knowledge flowed. During this time, sexual exclusivity began to take stronger root. While earlier societies may have tolerated greater fluidity in relationships, the demands of long-term child rearing and property sharing encouraged more permanent pairings. Jealousy, once seen as a disruptive emotion, became a protective mechanism. A man wanted to ensure that the children he supported were truly his, while a woman needed assurance that her partner would not abandon her for another. Emotional attachment, reinforced by cultural norms, increasingly defined the marital bond. This is also the period when rituals resembling proto-marriages began to appear. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherers, who are often considered living analogs of prehistoric societies, have observed ceremonies marking the union of men and women. These unions are not simply practical arrangements, but carry symbolic and communal significance. By celebrating a couple's bond, the community reinforces the importance of stability, cooperation, and the nurturing of children. Reading this content is so eloquent. By the end of the Paleolithic, humans were on the cusp of a major transformation: the transition from foraging to farming. This shift, which began around 10,000 years ago, would completely reshape the nature of marriage and family. But even before agriculture, the foundations were already firmly in place. Families had become the core units of society, marriages were gaining cultural weight, and the values of loyalty and responsibility were deeply rooted in human psychology. To illustrate this progression, let us consider the difference between humans and our primate relatives. Among chimpanzees, males compete fiercely for dominance, and access to females depends on rank. Female chimpanzees may mate with multiple partners, and paternity is often uncertain. Bonobos, on the other hand, use sex as a social tool, with relationships fluid and promiscuous. Neither species forms long-term pair bonds resembling human marriage. The contrast lies in the helplessness of human infants. Without years of shared parental care, human children would not survive. Thus, while chimpanzees and bonobos thrive in promiscuous systems, humans evolved toward exclusivity and long-term cooperation. The significance of fire should not be overlooked. As humans gathered nightly around hearths, families naturally became the centers of warmth, storytelling, and teaching. Fire transformed human social life, fostering intimacy and identity within family groups. This simple innovation provided a setting in which marital bonds could deepen, giving rise to the symbolic and emotional dimensions of marriage. By this stage of evolution, love was no longer just a biological instinct, but also a cultural ideal. While prehistoric people did not write poems or sing love songs as we do today, their actions, burying loved ones together, creating fertility symbols, celebrating unions, reveal a profound appreciation for the emotional power of human bonds. Love had become more than reproductive necessity. It was now the glue holding families and communities together. Thus, the long arc of prehistory shows us that marriage was not invented overnight. It was born gradually, shaped by biology, necessity, and imagination. From the helpless cries of infants to the flickering light of the hearth, from the hunt for food to the creation of sacred rituals, every aspect of human life pushed us toward pair bonding. By the time agriculture arrived, humanity was already prepared for the next step, turning marriage into a fully recognized institution at the heart of society. When humanity entered the transitional phase from hunting-gathering to agriculture, the meaning of marriage deepened even further. If earlier bonds were built primarily for child-rearing and mutual support, now they became inseparably tied to property, inheritance, and social order. This shift marked one of the greatest turning points in human history. Before the dawn of agriculture, possessions were minimal. A stone tool, a bone spear, or a wooden digging stick was valuable but replaceable. Sharing was common, and ownership had little long-term significance. But when humans began cultivating crops and domesticating animals around 10,000 years ago, the situation changed entirely. Land, harvests, and herds became precious assets. Whoever controlled them held the keys to survival. At this stage, reading this content is so eloquent. Marriage was no longer simply about companionship or reproduction. It was also about managing property and securing economic stability. Men needed wives to help manage land, tend livestock, and raise children who would later contribute to labor. Women needed husbands to protect their resources and guarantee food security. This interdependence created bonds stronger than ever before, because they were not only emotional, but also economic. The household replaced the herd as the fundamental unit of survival. Consequently, societies began to establish rules around marriage. Tribal customs regulated who could marry whom, whether unions occurred within or outside the group, what bride wealth or dowry was required, and how children were to be identified and inherited. These were the first outlines of formal marriage systems, regulations ensuring order and fairness in an increasingly complex world. In many early cultures, marriage was accompanied by sacred rituals. Festivals tied to harvests often included ceremonies for unions. A newly married couple might sow seeds together, symbolizing their shared role in nurturing both crops and children. The child born from this union was not seen as an individual possession, but as a blessing of fertility for the entire community. In this way, marriage extended beyond personal concerns and carried cosmic significance. The joining of man and woman mirrored the cycles of life and renewal in nature itself. At the same time, consciousness of lineage and ancestry became sharper. With land and property at stake, establishing clear parentage was essential. Men wanted assurance that their heirs were truly their biological offspring. Women wanted assurance that their husbands would remain to protect the family. These concerns strengthened the trend toward monogamy, though in some cases, polygyny, a man with multiple wives, persisted, especially where wealth or political power concentrated in certain individuals. Moral values began to form around these structures. Fidelity became more than a personal choice. It was a social expectation. Infidelity threatened property lines and social harmony, so it was condemned. Abandoning one's family was not merely irresponsible, it was a violation of emerging social codes. Over time, virtues such as loyalty, responsibility, and protection became enshrined in cultural norms, shaping human ethics in ways that still resonate today. The difference from other primates was now undeniable. Whereas chimpanzees or bonobos continued to live in groups with fluid sexual relations, humans invested in long-term pair bonding to protect their slow-developing young. This biological necessity fueled social innovation. The human family became not just a unit of survival, but the foundation of society itself. Cultural imagination reinforced this development. As humans created myths, stories, and religions to explain the world, many of these narratives revolved around divine couples. Sky fathers and earth mothers gave birth to the cosmos. Gods and goddesses united to create humanity. These myths did not arise by accident. They reflected lived reality. Just as divine pairs, reading this content is so eloquent. Ensured cosmic balance, human couples ensured community survival. Symbol and practice mirrored each other, embedding the marital bond into both daily life and spiritual belief. This transformation became even more visible as the first civilizations arose. In Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, China, and Greece, marriage evolved into an institution of both private and public significance. Kings and nobles used marriages to seal alliances, secure succession, and expand power. While love and family remained central, marriage also became a political tool. Despite this expansion of purpose, its roots were still the same: the need to bind men and women together to raise children, share property, and maintain order. Looking at burials, rituals, and laws from this period, we can see how marriage was elevated to the foundation of civilization. The household, once a survival strategy, became the primary site of economic production and cultural continuity. It was within families that knowledge, language, and skills were passed down. It was within families that myths and values were instilled. And it was within families that the very concept of community was born. Thus, the journey from herd to marriage was not sudden, but the result of countless generations adapting to challenges. From the uncertain steppes of Australopithecus on the African plains to the flickering campfires of Homo erectus, to the fertile fields of the Neolithic farmers, every stage shaped the institution we now call marriage. Without these bonds, humans would not have built the complex societies we see today. In the long development of humanity, the formation of marital customs was not merely a social phenomenon, but a decisive turning point that shaped the entire course of civilization. To see this more clearly, we must look at how the transition from herd life to structured marriage continued to unfold in the late prehistoric era and into the age of ancient civilizations. Once agriculture became established, the family stood at the very center of production and cultural transmission. Children were not only cared for, but also trained to inherit knowledge, skills, and traditions. In the hunting-gathering era, knowledge was largely transmitted communally, but in farming societies, most skills were passed within families. Fathers taught sons how to plow, herd, and craft tools. Mothers taught daughters how to sew, weave, cook, and nurture. The family became the cradle of education, and through it, society gained continuity across generations. Marriage, therefore, became not only a bond for raising children, but also a responsibility to transmit culture. To marry, have children, and raise them properly was seen as both a personal duty and a communal expectation. In many societies, those who refused or failed to do so were marginalized, as they contributed little to the survival and continuity of the group. For this reason, marriage was often sanctified by religion and bound to divine will, ensuring its sacred and inviolable status. At the same time, social stratification brought new dimensions to marriage. As tribes evolved into chiefdoms and kingdoms, not everyone could freely choose their spouse. Among elites, marriage became a political instrument. Leaders arranged unions to strengthen alliances and expand power. Consolidated power. Still, beneath these political strategies, the core of marriage remained the same: the enduring partnership between a man and a woman to sustain family and community. Psychological evolution reinforced these developments. Anthropologists argue that natural selection favored those capable of forming deep emotional attachments. Traits such as love, jealousy, and loyalty were not arbitrary. They enhanced reproductive success. Men who bonded strongly with their partners were more likely to protect their offspring. Women who secured stable mates had better chances of raising surviving children. Over millennia, these emotional capacities became hardwired into the human brain. What we now call love is thus both a biological adaptation and a cultural expression, rooted in survival. It is worth asking, what if humanity had never developed marital bonds? Without stable families, children would have been abandoned more often, mortality would have remained high, and social groups would have lacked cohesion. The human species might never have advanced beyond small, unstable bands. It was the family that provided the stability necessary for language, culture, and technology to flourish. This does not mean, however, that the remnants of herd life vanished entirely. In many cultures, traces of older systems persisted. Some tribes practiced group marriages, in which multiple men and women shared responsibilities. Others maintained polygyny, or, more rarely, polyandry, shaped by local ecology and economy. But even in these cases, the pair bond of husband and wife remained the nucleus of family life. With the rise of ancient civilizations, marriage became codified in law. In Mesopotamia, the Code of Hammurabi defined spousal rights and obligations, inheritance, divorce, and adultery. In Egypt, marriage was treated as a social contract, yet also linked to divine order. In China, it was tied to filial duty and the continuity of ancestral lines. In Greece and Rome, it carried both personal and political weight. Across cultures, marriage evolved from a natural practice into a fully institutionalized system, indispensable to governance and social stability. Looking back, we see that all of this began with a simple biological necessity: raising helpless infants. From that necessity, humans developed one of the most powerful institutions in history: the family. Without families, knowledge would not have passed reliably across generations. Without families, societies could not have stabilized or expanded. Without families, civilization itself might never have arisen. Today, marriage and family may seem self-evident. Yet this obvious institution is the product of a long evolutionary journey. From the cold caves of early humans to the fields of the first farmers, from myths of divine couples to legal codes of ancient states, the path from herd to marriage is written in every step of human history. When we speak of love, loyalty, and family, we are not just speaking of personal stories. We are invoking the evolutionary triumph of our species. Our ancestors, through countless trials of survival, learned to transform instinct into responsibility, freedom into commitment, and chaos into order. This transformation, from herd to marriage, propelled humanity further than any other species on Earth. If you find it interesting and meaningful, please share the video and subscribe to the channel to follow the next videos. Sincerely thank you, goodbye, and see you again.